So little time to give space to so many voices. That was my Olympian task. When I began filming this project for the Box Hill Neighbourhood Council, I had no idea where the journey would take me or whether I would actually reach the destination. On this journey, I discovered how not to do things, many blind alleys, and almost gave up at one point. On the way, though, I found my own voice. In this video, I tried to present the journeys of the voices you will meet, in the hope that you will find their voyages interesting. It seems that during the run-up to the races, Box Hill Village was the invisible twin, together with its siblings Headley, Gibbons Grove and Mickleham. All focus was on the National Trust. This gave the villages a sense of exclusion, which would have dissipated had Lowcog been a little more open. All the doubts vanished, though, as Box Hill became the epicentre of something extraordinary, something that will never be repeated in our lifetime. I leave it to you to judge whether I have achieved my own medal.
The people gathered and watched and waited, then bellowed their encouragement to the riders as they swept past in a mass of colour and energy and speed. On the 28th and 29th of July 2012, the Olympic road cycle races came to Box Hill. This is our story. In their thousands, the people came from the four corners, drawn to the epicentre that was Box Hill. They came to see and experience for themselves the Olympic road cycle races. From campsites, car parks and train stations, they walked for miles up the winding and muddy footpaths along the silent roadways devoid of traffic to discover the electrifying atmosphere of Box Hill. They queued, a typically English pastime, for the opportunity of a lifetime. They were greeted by the warm embrace of the many volunteers, the stewards and the service personnel who guided them through the entrances and hidden pathways to the viewing areas. The air was overflowing with optimism and delight for what was to come. Most were unaware of the hive of activity that went on behind the scenes to organise the chaos, to plan for possibilities, and to minimise the effect on the wildlife and ecology of Box Hill. This is their story.
What drew you to working with nature?
Well, I've always had a passion with nature. I mean, I grew up in a little tiny hamlet in the middle of nowhere. And so if you didn't go and play in the countryside, you had nowhere to play. So I've always been climbing trees and into wildlife and fishing. And so it's just been a great sort of natural progression of mine. I can't imagine myself doing anything else, actually.
When did you become involved with the planning of the Olympic cycle races?
Yeah, that was some time ago. That was a good 2.5 years ago. I think it was winter. I remember because there was snow and ice all over the zigzag road, and they wanted to see the zigzag road, and we drove up here in a four-wheel drive, and big ice sheets slid off the roof of my car. I think that must have been winter 2009, I think it was, when we first got approached.
What was involved with this planning?
Well, immediately we had to worry about the nature conservation, not so much for the cyclists coming up, they're obviously going to do no harm. It was the crowd management and how we were going to manage the numbers of people without having any detrimental impact on the nature conservation.
The Friends of Box Hill is a charity that was set up back in 1964.
So quite a while ago.
Yes, long time ago. We'll work with everybody from general manager to the ranger, basically. So we work around the whole group.
That's the whole lot, really.
Yes. Yeah.
So you must have been quite involved in the Olympics, I'd imagine then.
Yes, we were very involved in the Olympics. It's been probably definitely the dominant project on this hill, and an awful lot of time and energy has gone into that. And I guess we were involved, from fairly early on, and our main involvement was to try to ensure that having a race here actually didn't harm the protected area.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Because it is protected as a special area of conservation, a special area of scientific interest, which means it's covered under law and has to be protected. So it was a difficult job to ensure that that is protected, and at the same time as making sure that the spectators had a really good time. Some of them, the people who are friends, are experts in different aspects of conservation, and they were very heavily involved in helping with how we were going to protect the species of the habitat, really, of the species, because you need to protect the habitat to protect the species.
Yeah, exactly.
So essentially we were how you're going to protect that habitat.
A tender went out to a lot of different artists, and they were particularly after Adonis Blue. That was it's become a bit of a symbol, I think, for the National Trust working together with the Olympics and with the Natural England as well. So they were keen to have an Adonis Blue. But the initial idea was that I would work in chalks. In fact, I actually got hold of the chalks and were all ready to do that. But then LOCOG weren't keen that I was working there overnight. That was going to be a bit difficult with all the vehicles going backwards and forwards. So they looked at it and decided that it would be as well to just do it as a transfer onto the road. And in some ways, that, from my point of view, that was really nice. It meant I've got a big workshop that I work in. It meant that I could work in the workshop. And actually, instead of just having one single image of the butterfly out there, they managed to reproduce it 3 times, which was great from the TV perspective. That it was very bold, very bright and cheerful, quite large, maybe larger than I would have been able to do if I'd done it overnight. And created a real impact with having 3, one after the other, because every time you saw the cyclist 9 times coming up that hill, then there was this bang, bang, bang with these 3 giant butterfly images.
Trust, LOCOG actually paid for a lot of survey work to be done, so that we could find out exactly what's on the hill and where it is. Because I mean, we knew where. We knew that some of it's there, but we didn't know exactly where it is because we haven't had the need. Because we haven't
all
had
the numbers for that matter.
No, that's right. So Anne Sankey and Gail Jeffcoat, for example, have done lots of work for the botany and the invertebrates, and they've got a lot of data that was very useful to the people who were contracted by LOCOG to carry out the surveys. And then they went round with them at times too. And that survey work was essential because what it did was actually show where all the species were and where the habitat could probably actually take more spectators.
Why were the spectator numbers limited so much?
Yeah, it's because if you get lots and lots of people on the roadside verges, they could trample it absolutely flat. And you could argue that we get lots of visitors at Box Hill anyway. In fact, we welcome almost 1 million visitors a year. But they would act in a very different way than sports spectators. Our visitors generally stick to well-worn paths, whereas sports spectators will obviously line the route of the zigzag. And we've got some really, really rare species that live on there. And some of those rare species rely on a kind of 3-dimension to the grasses, to the age structures. So they wouldn't do well with it all being flat. I mean, I've said before, it's a bit like imagining that grassland sward as a rainforest, but in miniature. If you flattened your rainforest, it'll still be there, laid on the floor, but where would the birds roost and where would the bats live, And it's the same with the grasses. So, yeah, we've got some rare butterflies like the small blue, and it relies on pretty tall grasses to roost in at night to keep away from predatory insects.
There are various groups that use Box Hill. What kind of resistance did you have from the various groups?
Well, we had a few people concerned with the protection of nature conservation, quite justifiably. You know, it's one of our concerns too. And when it became obvious that we were going to have to limit numbers of spectators to protect the nature conservation, then we had the cycling clubs and cycling groups that obviously were a bit upset that they weren't going to be able to see the only hill climb on the Olympic road race. So, you know, two opposing camps there with quite legitimate concerns.
Did you feel quite stressed about trying to balance between the rock and the hard place?
We were between a rock and a hard place for a bit. We weren't making many friends at one point, you know, because the nature conservation lobbyists were worried that we weren't going to pay due regard to the nature conservation interests, and that bigger kind of political powers would railroad our hopes and beliefs and our planning. And then the cycling fraternity were sort of quite crestfallen at the thought of having no one standing there on Box Hill watching the races. So yeah, it was a difficult month or two there.
Now we're a month after the races. Have you done any more surveys to find out the results?
Yeah, we had the races were on Saturday and Sunday. On the Monday following, we had Mike Edwards, who's our ecologist, an independent ecologist who did the 2011 surveys, come out, have a look, and tell us what the impact had been. And we were absolutely punched in the air when he came back with no more of an impact than anticipated or planned for. I mean, I didn't think I was very stressed through this whole project. You know, I generally sort of soak up pressure, but actually I must have been, because when I got that early indication back that there had been no more detrimental effect to the downland than we'd planned for, I stood there on the edge of that zigzag valley looking down, and it just really welled up. You know, it was kind of did it.
That was quite an emotional point for you then, was that really?
Yeah, surprisingly so, because I'm not an emotional kind of guy. You know, I'm normally pretty level, pretty, you know, and so it surprised me actually how it felt as though pressure had been lifted at that time. You know. That
sounds really good.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't just me. You know, Mark Dawson, my colleague there, the head ranger here at Box Hill, he stood with me at the same time. We just looked down and we thought, yeah, did it.
LOCOG actually paid for a lot of clearance work at the bottom of the road.
Yeah.
Which was one of the things that was in the conservation plans, which the Friends actually produced those conservation plans.
Yeah.
One of the things, but it was a real long-term aim, and one that we never really thought we'd get round to, or the National Trust would get round to, was to clear that, because with climate change things, they wanted to actually have an area that was a north-facing bank that was clear, and that would then actually give protection to some of the species that were on the other side to go onto the north in the future when it gets really, really hot. If it gets really hot. So we were really pleased to get a lot of that clearance work done, and actually some of the volunteers as well helped with clearance of the top. But LOCOG paid for a lot of that to be done. It was done very well actually.
I do a lot of discovery centres and interpretive planning, and just thought it would be a really nice thing to actually draw people and get people to flow into the space. So we took the honeybee theme and continued it out here on the wall, and you know, originally it was just a white wall, and so it's really, you know, it's a big draw. As you're driving along the road, you can see this mural, and it really pulls you in, I think. So.
It's certainly stunning. And I just regularly sit here and I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing, because it's so natural, and so the colours are kind of quite intense.
Yeah, I find that colours in nature are really intense. If you look at the bigger picture, at the landscape views, sometimes they can be quite muted, and I think that's about the light on any given day. But if you get up close and personal with any wildlife, it is so colourful. You could put a colour wheel out there, and you would be able to, if you walked around with a colour wheel, you will find every colour on that colour wheel somewhere in nature, and that really fascinates me when I'm painting. I like to I've always been very focused on the close-up detail of things. I'm painting the butterfly on the road. I mean, there's just infinite detail and infinite colours, even in an Adonis blue. It's not just blue, but there's all sorts of this, like tinges of purples, and you've got the colours in the background behind it as well. And yeah, I just find that wonderful about nature, that there's so much colour to it. And I think using acrylics, which is the media that I tend to work in, really helps to draw out those colours and bring it home to people, and excites people, I think, about wildlife, which is what the projects of the Adonis Blue on the roads was about. It's trying to, obviously we've got the Olympics have been up here, the cycle race has gone through, but it's just showing people that Box Hill is more than the cycle race, that it's a fantastic resource for people to get out into some wonderful habitats and wonderful wildlife, and it's drawing people out into that landscape and saying that there's a lot to see here, and it's a very, very special place.
Mark Dawson and Andy Wright put in a hell of a lot of work to actually ensure that the areas were protected, and also Georgina Terry from Natural England, because Natural England are ultimately responsible because it's they've legally got to ensure it's protected, and she did an amazing amount of work, well above beyond the call of duty, to just ensure that the area was protected and that the fencing was in the right places. They got some wonderful fencing contractors, and they were superb. So they did amazing things, like they liaised with us to try and work out what species they needed to avoid when they were putting up, to have photos of the things for their contractors. So I mean, they hired their own environmental person to ensure that they knew what it was they were doing when they were putting the fencing up, because it was a lot of fencing that went up.
There's so much more to this than people are aware of, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
The spectators were amazingly well behaved. Absolutely incredible, and I've made special effort to thank the spectators for abiding by the rules. At one point down there on Butterfly Bend, they said to one of the rangers, "Well, I can't see any butterflies. What's special about this place?" And within moments, a slow worm slithered through them, and they all stopped and looked at the slow worm. Oh wow! And then they saw a common lizard not long after that. And the rangers were just saying, "Would you mind please staying behind the ropes and pins?" And that's all it was, ropes and pins. Nothing, no big fences to hold them in. And they absolutely followed the requests to the letter. In fact, there was a pyramidal orchid down there on the bend, in amongst 200 spectators of people walking past it time and time again, and it was still standing on the Monday after the race. They were so well behaved. It's amazing.
That was what was the atmosphere like?
It was brilliant, actually. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I didn't go down to, I only went down as far as Strawbell Slope, but and Donkey Green, and the atmosphere was amazing, especially when the cyclists started coming through and people were all shouting and roaring. It was fantastic. And for the ladies' race, I actually started to enjoy it, because the pressure was off. We'd had the men's race successfully. The ladies' race was coming through. It looked like it was all going well. The organisation worked a lot better on the Sunday, and it was a really enjoyable time despite the weather.
The huge mass of riders swept by in a moment, a blur of bodies entwined with bikes in a riot of colour. The whir of gears. In the wake of the express, dust and paper is set dancing over our heads, the turbulent air whipping the hair across our eyes. That was a bunch, or peloton, French for platoon, literally a large body of men, the epicentre of the race. A tailwind will see it bowling along at 30s, a headwind much slower. Team tactics will dictate the pace, set the odds for those weighing up their chances of escape, but the dynamics are such that a rider must judge his effort to perfection if he or she is to succeed in getting clear. Why? Air resistance, that's why. Air resistance is the bane of all cyclists' lives. It materialises once you top 15 miles per hour and gets only worse the faster you go. An invisible force through which a bunch will punch a bigger hole than a single rider and move faster as riders at the front relay each other in a constantly moving chain to share this work. The cagey ones, or the protected team leaders, take shelter in the wheels, saving 20% more energy than those taking the brunt of it. The benefit disappears on steep climbs when the gradient, not air resistance, becomes the problem. Then the peloton may fragment into smaller groups. Best place to be is in the first 20 to avoid crashes likely further back in a tightly packed peloton. You must constantly move up to stand still, so to speak, because others will be striving for that top 20 place too, moving past, sending you backwards. The sprinters' team will often drive the peloton at speed to discourage attacks, to keep the race together, to favour their sprinters. Others may want to break it up, those who favour contesting the finish from a smaller group. So within the peloton there is a constant state of motion. If a break does get clear, teams not represented will set a tempo to keep them in reach and gamble on rushing them near the finish. However, teammates of those in the escape will attempt to disrupt the chase, soft pedalling in the line to slow it down. As the peloton accelerates and is strung into one thin, long, snaking line, riders often struggle to hold the wheel in front. Lose that wheel and a rider will be gone, washed away, out of the back as the saying goes, as the peloton speeds on its unrelenting way.
When you completed the 2 days and everything, all the stress had kind of vanished, how were you actually feeling after that?
Yeah, I was pretty elated actually. You know that we'd put so much time and effort into this project, and to have it come off so well, and have the eyes of the world on us. Let's not forget there's an estimated 2 billion people watch that race, and we were at the heart of it. I mean, it's a kind of once in a career kind of opportunity. There's not many countryside managers get to manage a project like that. So to actually pull it off, and there's only one or two little tiny niggles around the edges that could have gone smoother, but the majority of the heart of the project worked exactly how it was planned. It was amazing. Really proud to have been part of it.